Welcome to Reformed Thinking, a deep dive into the source material that shapes our understanding of truth. I want you to just stop whatever you're doing for a second and just picture this in your mind.
Right, just really put yourself there.
Yeah. It is the eve of what is arguably the most terrifying night in ancient history. You are enslaved in a foreign land. You're part of this brutalized, marginalized people who have known absolutely nothing but back-breaking labor, the crack of a whip, and systemic oppression for generations.
Well, yeah, it's bleak.
It really is. And now this localized apocalypse is basically unfolding all around you. Death is quite literally sweeping through the most powerful empire on earth, and it's completely indiscriminate in its terrifying power.
Absolutely terrifying.
And here's the truly wild part. Your survival, like the actual life of your firstborn child, hinges entirely on a single, highly specific set of instructions regarding a farm animal, a bunch of weeds, and a wooden door frame.
That's all they had.
Exactly. You don't get a fortress. You don't have, like, a standing army or weapons. All you have is a bloody doorway.
It is an incredibly stark image, isn't it? And what's fascinating here, when we really look closely at the source text we've gathered for today's deep dive, is that this is not merely an ancient historical survival story.
Right. It's not just some fable.
Exactly. It's not a myth about warding off a boogeyman. The text we are examining today, Exodus chapter 12, specifically verses 21 and 22, it actually stands as the foundational blueprint in redemptive history for understanding how divine justice actually operates.
Okay, so it's setting a precedent.
Yes. The sources we're analyzing point out that this single night establishes the concepts of substitution and the only authorized means of rescue. I mean, life and death are literally being separated by a piece of wood and a very specific set of actions.
Okay, I really want to unpack this from the very beginning, because to truly feel the weight of this night, we have to understand the world these people were actually living in.
Let's set the stage.
Yeah, so we're looking at a historical setting, roughly around 1446 BC. The Israelites have been living in the land of Egypt for, what, over 400 years at this point?
Yeah, over 4 centuries.
Right, and it wasn't always this bad. They started out as favored guests. If you remember the ancient accounts of Joseph, they were essentially saved from famine by the Egyptian government.
They were, yeah. They were welcomed initially.
But over the centuries, the political winds shifted. Under the massive, sprawling power of the 18th dynasty, they transitioned from honored guests to brutalized slaves.
A horrific shift.
Truly. They're out there building massive storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. They're in the blistering heat, making mud bricks, eventually without even being given the straw to hold them together.
And, that physical environment is deeply tied to the spiritual environment. To understand the Israelite situation, we really have to recognize that they are living in a society absolutely saturated in polytheistic idolatry.
It wasn't just a secular state.
Not at all. Egypt wasn't just a political superpower, it was a religious one. Literally every aspect of daily life, the weather, the crops, the rivers, childbirth, disease, all of it was governed by a pantheon of gods.
Wow.
Yeah, the Egyptians believed their gods maintained the cosmic order, or Ma'at. And Pharaoh himself, he was viewed as the divine mediator, the living incarnation of the god Horus.
Which makes the events leading up to this night so much more than just, weird weather phenomena. Our sources spend a lot of time on the 10 plagues that precede this Passover night.
They are crucial to the context.
Yeah, and I always used to think of the plagues as just God flexing his muscles, just throwing random natural disasters at Pharaoh to get him to tap out.
Right, like a show of force.
Exactly. But the texts argue these were actually highly calculated.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because the sources are adamant that the plagues were not random at all. They were a calculated, systematic, judicial assault against the specific false gods of the Egyptian pantheon.
Like a targeted attack.
Precisely. It's essentially a cosmic deicide. The author of Exodus is showing us a systematic dismantling of the entire Egyptian worldview.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. So, for example, when the Nile River was turned to blood, that wasn't just a gross inconvenience. The Nile was the absolute lifeblood of the Egyptian economy and agriculture. It was worshipped.
Wait, they actually worshiped the river?
Yes. The god Hapi was the personification of the annual flooding of the Nile. And Osiris, the god of the underworld and rebirth, was mythologically linked to the river too. The waters were sometimes actually considered his bloodstream.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
Yeah, so turning the Nile to actual blood was a direct, humiliating judgment upon those specific deities. Yahweh was proving that Hapi and Osiris had absolutely no power over their own domain.
Okay, that makes so much sense. It's like taking out the enemy's communication towers first. And the sources point out this happens with almost all the plagues, right? Like the frogs. I just thought the frog plague was just kind of bizarre and honestly a little funny in a morbid way.
Right, it sounds totally absurd to our modern ears.
Hmm.
But in Egypt, the goddess Hecate, who was the goddess of fertility and childbirth, she was actually depicted with the head of a frog.
Oh, really?
Yeah, frogs were considered sacred. To kill one, even accidentally, was punishable by death. So Yahweh causes millions of frogs to swarm out of the river. They are in the ovens, in the beds, in the kneading bowls.
Just everywhere.
Everywhere. The entire country is covered in them. And the Egyptians can't step anywhere without squishing them. But they aren't supposed to kill them because they're sacred.
Wow, so it's psychological warfare too.
Exactly. It is a profound mockery of Hecate. The gods of Egypt literally become the very instruments of their torment.
That is wild. So it's a geopolitical and spiritual war, and Egypt's gods are being weaponized against them. And that basically culminates in the plague of darkness right before the Passover.
Precisely. 3 days of supernatural thick darkness that could physically be felt.
Which sounds terrifying.
It was the ultimate devastating judgment upon Ra, the supreme sun god of the Egyptian empire. Ra was believed to ride his chariot across the sky every day, bringing light and life.
And God just shuts him down.
Yes. By plunging the empire into absolute darkness, Yahweh demonstrated total sovereign supremacy over the highest deity in the land. He effectively shut off the sun.
Which brings us to the 10th plague, the climax of this whole cosmic confrontation. The judgment targets the firstborn. And I think we need to explain to the listener why the firstborn was such a specific target.
That's a really important point.
Yeah, because in our modern culture, being the oldest sibling just means, like, your parents were strictest with you, and maybe you get the front seat of the car.
Right. It doesn't mean much today.
No, not at all. But in the ancient Near East, it was everything, right?
The distinction is massive. In the ancient world, the firstborn son was the principal heir. He received a double portion of the family's inheritance. He was the executor of the ancestral estate.
So he held all the economic power.
Yes, but even more importantly, he served as the spiritual head and priest of the family after the father passed away. He carried the family name, the lineage, and the entire hope for the continuation of that dynasty.
And I imagine that's even more extreme for the royals.
Exactly. When we elevate that to the royal level for Pharaoh, his firstborn son wasn't just a political heir. He was considered a literal god-in-waiting.
So by declaring that the firstborn of every household in Egypt is going to die from Pharaoh on his throne down to the prisoner in the dungeon, this isn't just an arbitrary punishment.
No, it's highly intentional.
It's a catastrophic blow against Egypt's future, its pride, and the very core of its religion.
It is the ultimate display of divine justice against an unrepentant totalitarian empire that has enslaved and, frankly, murdered the children of the covenant people. Let's not forget, Pharaoh had previously ordered the male infants of the Israelites to be thrown into the Nile River.
Right. The reciprocal justice there is devastating.
It is. But the sources we're analyzing emphasize a profound theological tension that arises right at this exact moment.
Yeah, and this is the question I would absolutely be screaming at the text if I were reading it for the first time. The Israelites are God's chosen people, right?
That's the assumption, yes.
They are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the victims here. They are the ones groaning under the whip of the slave masters. So why do they need a bloody doorframe to be spared?
It's a great question.
I mean, aren't they the good guys in this narrative? Shouldn't a holy God's judgment just naturally pass over them because of their ethnicity or just, their victimhood?
It's the most natural question to ask, and it gets to the very heart of the theology presented in these sources. The answer they provide is rooted in the absolute, uncompromising severity of divine holiness.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, the Israelites were not inherently immune to God's wrath simply by virtue of their physical lineage or their status as oppressed victims. Oppression does not equal moral perfection.
Wait, really? Because I feel like today we totally equate suffering with innocence. If you are the victim of a terrible system, society kind of assumes you must inherently be righteous.
That is exactly the modern assumption the text shatters.
Yeah.
The Israelites were sinners. They had lived in the cultural soup of Egypt for over 4 centuries.
And it rubbed off on them.
More than just rubbed off. Later biblical prophets, like Ezekiel in chapter 20, explicitly point out that the Israelites had deeply absorbed Egypt's idolatry into their own lives. They were actually worshiping the false gods of the land.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they were corrupted. And the theological premise here is that when God's holy, sin-avenging judgment sweeps through a land, it does not discriminate based on human ethnicity, political affiliation, or socioeconomic status.
So it's like a hurricane. A hurricane doesn't care if you're a good person or a bad person, rich or poor. It just destroys whatever is in its path.
That's a really helpful analogy.
Mm.
God's justice is universal. Without a God-ordained substitute to absorb that justice, the Israelites were just as exposed to the righteous judgment of the Creator as the Egyptian taskmasters were.
Because their sin demanded the exact same penalty.
Exactly.
Okay, so their rescue couldn't just be an automatic free pass. God couldn't just look down, see that they were Israelites, and say, I'll turn a blind eye to your idolatry because you've had a really tough 400 years.
Right, justice doesn't work like that.
It required a specific, authorized action. The justice actually had to be satisfied. And that brings us to the actual command Moses gives to the people in Exodus 12.21.
Yes, and the narrative structure here is incredibly precise. Moses doesn't just, stand on a rock and yell to a disorganized mob of 2 million people. He acts in his mediatorial prophetic role.
So there's an organized system here.
Definitely. The text says he gathers the elders of Israel, in Hebrew, the Ziki Israel. In this patriarchal tribal society, these elders were the recognized representative heads of the extended families.
Okay.
God uses covenantal order. He communicates his decree to Moses. Moses delivers it to the elders. And the elders are responsible for ensuring that every single household executes this command with absolute fidelity.
And the command Moses gives revolves around 3 very specific verbs. Let's get into those verbs because our sources highlight them as critical. I don't know ancient Hebrew, so you'll have to guide me here. The text says they are to draw out and take a lamb. Why that specific phrasing? Why not just say, hey, go grab a sheep?
Well, the verb used is mashak, and it carries a much heavier weight than just randomly grabbing whatever animal happens to be wandering near the tent.
It's more deliberate.
Very deliberate. It signifies an active separation. It implies actively drawing a specific lamb out from the midst of the general flock. You are inspecting it, evaluating it, and consecrating this specific unblemished animal exclusively for a holy life or death purpose.
So you are setting it apart from all common use.
Exactly. You're isolating it.
Okay, so it's highly intentional. You are selecting your family's actual substitute. And then what happens?
The theological identity of this entire night hinges on the next major verb Moses uses, which is shajat. He commands them to slaughter the Passover lamb.
And the sources emphasize that this isn't just a generic word for an animal dying, right? There's a massive cultural scandal wrapped up in this specific word.
Utterly scandalous. To understand why, we have to recognize that Hebrew has several different words for taking a life. There is harag, which means to kill in battle or in a violent frenzy.
Okay.
There is ratsak, which translates to unlawful murder. There is zabak, a general term for offering a sacrificial feast. But Moses specifically uses shadja.
And what does that mean, practically speaking?
It is the technical Levitical term for a highly precise ritual slaughter. It specifically involves the slitting of the throat to completely and rapidly bleed the animal out. It demands a physical, violent, bloody death.
Wow, that's graphic.
It is. And to grasp the sheer terror of this command, we have to look again at the Egyptian religious environment we discussed earlier. In Upper Egypt, the ram was considered highly sacred.
Right, because of their gods.
Yes. It was the living symbol of the great god Amun. To publicly take a sheep, tie it up, and slit its throat in the manner of shashat was considered a heinous, sacrilegious impiety. It was the ultimate offense to the Egyptian religious mind.
Okay, I want to try and put myself in their sandals for a minute. If I'm an Israelite elder, this is essentially a suicide mission.
It certainly felt like it.
This is like being ordered to publicly burn the national flag and desecrate the most sacred monuments of your oppressive, heavily armed captors while you are still living right there in their country, completely defenseless.
Exactly.
You are intentionally committing what your slave masters consider the highest possible form of blasphemy. Why would God force them to do this?
The sources suggest this is entirely the point. God is forcing the Israelites to make a definitive public break from Egyptian paganism.
Oh, wow. So they have to choose a side.
There could be no secret, undercover followers of Yahweh on the night of the Passover. There is no middle ground. The public slaughter of the lamb was a definitive repudiation of the gods of their oppressors. It was a line drawn in the sand.
It's essentially saying you can't hedge your bets anymore. You can't worship Yahweh on the Sabbath and then bow down to Amun on Monday just to keep the peace with your slave masters.
Exactly. And theologically, it establishes an unyielding principle that carries through the rest of the text. Salvation is never bloodless.
The sources are very clear on this.
Yes, sin cannot simply be bypassed by divine amnesty apart from satisfied justice. The innocent, unblemished substitute, the victim, must violently die in place of the guilty firstborn.
The lamb dies so the family can live.
Right. Deliverance from bondage comes through judgment, and for Israel, that judgment falls completely upon the designated substitute.
Which is a heavy, heavy concept. A life for a life. But here is where the mechanics of this night get really interesting to me. According to the text, a dead lamb lying in the dirt doesn't actually save anyone.
No, it doesn't.
The shedding of the blood is only the first half of the equation. What happens next is the literal physical line between life and death. The blood has to be applied. And the instructions Moses gives in verse 22 are incredibly specific and honestly really messy.
They're very messy and intensely physical. Moses commands them, "You shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood."
Let's break down the material culture of that instruction, starting with the hyssop. The Hebrew word is izov.
Yes, ease off.
Right, and the sources go out of their way to explain what this plant is, because I think a lot of people picture someone using like a delicate artisanal paintbrush you'd buy at a craft store, just carefully painting a neat little red line.
It is the farthest thing from a delicate paintbrush.
No.
Botanically, we are likely talking about Syrian marjoram, a wild plant native to the region.
Okay, so a local plant.
Yeah, it smells a bit like oregano, but more importantly, it has stiff, woody stalks and thick, heavily textured, hairy leaves. It is basically a rough, common weed that grows out of the cracks in walls.
Like a brush you'd use for scrubbing.
Exactly. And it is uniquely suited to absorb, hold, and then violently splatter heavy, coagulating liquid without falling apart.
So they gather a bunch of these rough weeds, and they're supposed to dip them into the basin. And our sources have a really fascinating note about the word for basin here, the Hebrew word saf. What's the double meaning there?
The noun saf is really fascinating in ancient architecture. It can certainly refer to a portable metal or clay basin, like a large bowl used to catch the blood when the animal's throat is slit.
Right, just a normal bowl.
But in Bronze Age architecture, saf was also the technical term for the threshold of the doorway itself.
Oh, the actual floor of the doorway.
Yes. Many ancient houses had a carved depression built directly into the stone sill at the entrance, designed to collect rainwater or to be used in domestic rituals.
So either they have a bowl sitting at the bottom of the door, or the blood is literally pooling in the stone threshold of the house itself.
Yes. Either way, the blood is gathered right at the foundational entry point of the home.
I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener. Why this hyper-specific, messy, outward ritual? Because if God knows everything, and God knows who the Israelites are, couldn't an Israelite father just, sit quietly in his living room, agree with Moses intellectually, acknowledge that Yahweh is a true God, and just pray a sincere prayer of faith in his heart?
That's a very modern way of thinking about it.
Right. Why the whole production with the weeds and the bloody door frames?
It's an essential question. The theologians whose work we are referencing argue that this highlights the vital, indispensable difference between redemption accomplished and redemption applied.
Accomplished versus applied.
Yes. As we established, blood left in the basin offers absolutely zero protection. The provision has been made, the substitute has died, the blood has been shed, but it must be personally applied to the household.
It's not automatic.
No. And the grammar here is striking. The verb used for applying the blood doesn't mean to lightly artistically dab it.
Right. The sources said the Hebrew implies something much more aggressive.
Yes, it is a causative action that means to forcefully strike or cause to touch. They are physically splashing, striking this blood onto the lintel, the top beam overhead, and the 2 vertical doorposts.
So it's a very visceral action.
Very. And the sources point out that this forcefully confronts 2 major human errors regarding faith. First, it confronts bare intellectualism.
Meaning just agreeing with facts in your head.
Precisely. Just agreeing with God in your head that a sacrifice is a good idea does not save you. You must actively shelter under it. Obedient application of the revealed word is the physical manifestation of faith.
That makes sense.
But secondly, the sources argue it confronts sacramentalism, the idea that the physical object itself has magical powers. The blood on the door isn't an apotropaic charm. It doesn't have a chemical property that repels angels of death.
It's not magic.
Right. Its efficacy lies entirely in the covenant promise of God attached to the command.
I love that distinction between redemption accomplished and applied. Makes me think of an analogy. Imagine you have a terminal illness. You are guaranteed to die from it. And a brilliant doctor finally creates the exact perfect cure.
Okay.
You buy the medicine, and it's sitting right there in a little bottle on your nightstand. You can read the label, you can intellectually believe that the medicine works, you can write eloquent essays about how brilliant the doctor is, you can even frame a picture of the medicine.
But you're still sick.
Exactly. Having the cure sitting on your nightstand doesn't heal you. You have to actually open the bottle and ingest it. The provision has to be personally applied to your own body. That's what taking the hyssop and striking the doorframe is. It is the active application of the cure.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. It requires active perception. So the picture we have now is the doorframe entirely framed in blood, splashed on the top, the left, the right, and pooling at the bottom threshold.
It's completely framed.
But even applying the blood isn't the final step in God's instructions. There was one more strict, uncompromising command they must follow to survive the night. Moses issues a categorical prohibition. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning.
It seems so simple, but the sources we are looking at say the grammar of that sentence in Hebrew is basically the ancient equivalent of a blaring air raid siren. It is an absolute, non-negotiable barrier.
It is an ironclad command. The sentence structure in the original text uses a form that essentially translates to an absolute, unbreakable barrier. Moses uses phrasing that leaves no room for loopholes.
No exceptions.
None. It means not a single individual man. There are no exceptions for the brave, the curious, or the skeptical. The boundary of safety is purely spatial and temporal.
What do you mean by spatial and temporal?
The spatial boundary is the doorway of the house. You must remain physically inside. The temporal boundary is the time frame, until morning. Outside that blood-stained doorframe, divine fury, unmitigated justice, and absolute death reign supreme.
But
Inside that blood-stained doorframe, there is perfect covenant security. The distinction is utterly binary. There is no gradient of safety. You are either covered by the blood or you are exposed to the destroyer.
I really want to try and capture the psychological environment inside those houses during that night, because I think it brings the reality of this text to life for you, the listener.
It's vital to picture it.
Imagine you are the father or mother of a firstborn child. It's midnight. The entire family is gathered inside. This isn't a celebratory feast with music and laughing. The text tells us they are dressed for immediate travel, sandals on their feet, belts fastened, stacks in their hands.
High tension.
Right. They are eating in haste. And then the waiting begins. And outside in the darkness, they start to hear it.
The historical reality of that moment would be staggering to endure.
Right. You'd hear the first scream from the Egyptian household next door, then another from down the street. And soon, the agonizing cries are echoing across the entire land of Egypt. The wailing of Egyptian mothers and fathers as the destroyer moves through the land, striking down the firstborn from the palace to the lowest mud brick hut.
Unimaginable grief outside.
And the sheer, overwhelming terror of hearing the judgment of a holy God falling upon the greatest empire on earth, and knowing that the only thing separating you from that exact same fate is a smear of sheep's blood on a piece of wood.
The theologians we are referencing suggest that Moses intended to cultivate a heart that feared God's absolute holiness while resting entirely in his covenant mercy.
Because they knew they weren't perfect.
Right. The Israelites knew that God's justice was passing over them, not because they were flawless people, not because they had never worshipped Egyptian idols, but exclusively because they were standing beneath the blood of the substitute.
The psychological tension is immense.
Immense. If an Israelite father panicked, or if he doubted the efficacy of the blood and decided to step outside the door maybe just to check the weather or to see what was happening to his Egyptian neighbor or to try and fight off the destroyer with his own sword, he would have abandoned the only God-ordained refuge.
To step outside for any reason was to invite immediate destruction.
Yes.
It's like being in a spiritual storm shelter during an F5 tornado. When you hear the freight train sound of the wind ripping houses off their foundations outside, you don't step outside at 2 a.m. to check the wind speed.
No, you stay in the shelter.
You don't rely on your own physical strength to hold your ground against a tornado. You stay put. You trust the shelter. The Israelites inside those houses experienced this profound mix of holy terror at the wrath of God and serene, absolute assurance in the mercy of God.
Because the promise was objective.
Right. They were completely safe, not because of their moral perfection, not because they felt particularly brave, but entirely because of the objective promise God had attached to the blood on the door.
And the sources emphasize that this obedient waiting, this resting in the shelter provided by God, is the ultimate posture of biblical faith. They contributed absolutely no invention to their deliverance.
God did the saving.
Yes, God provided the means, God commanded the application, God made the promise, and God preserved them. The household responded in trusting, resting obedience.
If this event was just a bizarre, one-off historical anomaly, it would be fascinating. But the source material insists that it is not. It's a blueprint. Fast forward over 1,000 years, and we see this exact same incredibly specific imagery showing up in the New Testament.
It's a direct continuation.
Yeah. The New Testament writers essentially take this entire night, the lamb, the hyssop, the blood, the door, and they point it directly at a single person. So how does the New Testament utilize this ancient event?
The New Testament explicitly and joyfully claims all of this ancient imagery for Jesus Christ. The theologians we've read argue that these connections are not speculative overlays invented after the fact.
It's not just a clever metaphor.
No, they are central to apostolic theology. For instance, the Apostle Paul states it categorically in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 7. He writes, "Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us."
Wow, that's incredibly direct.
It is. And at the very beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, John the Baptist sees him approaching and declares in John chapter 1, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
So the link is right there from the start.
Exactly. The argument is that the Old Testament Passover lamb was a historical shadow. Jesus Christ is the eternal substance casting that shadow.
The typological connections our sources draw here are absolutely mind-blowing when you put them side by side. Let's walk through them.
Let's do it.
First, the command in Exodus requires that the Passover lamb be an unblemished male, spotless, completely without defect. You couldn't just use the sick, three-legged sheep you wanted to get rid of anyway. Why does that matter in relation to Christ?
The sources contend that the spotless physical nature of the animal in Exodus foreshadows the absolute moral perfection of Jesus Christ. The New Testament writers repeatedly emphasize that Jesus was tempted in every way, yet was without sin.
So he was uniquely qualified.
Yes, he is presented as the sinless, perfect Son of God. And this is a crucial theological point. His moral perfection uniquely qualifies him to be the substitute. A sinner cannot atone for another sinner.
Two bankrupt people cannot pay each other's debts.
Exactly. Only a perfectly righteous, unblemished substitute can bear the penalty of the guilty.
And then there is the aspect of definite application. We talked about how the blood in Egypt wasn't just splashed indiscriminately up into the sky, hoping someone might accidentally walk under it.
Right, it's very targeted.
Moses didn't paint the blood on the pyramids or the city walls of Ramses. It was applied specifically and intentionally to the individual households of the Israelites.
Yes, and this is where the theological sources we are drawing from make a very specific argument about the nature of the cross. They argue this illustrates the doctrine of definite atonement.
Definite atonement. Okay, break that down.
The argument is that Christ's atoning death upon the cross was not merely a hypothetical offer that made salvation possible for everyone, but actually secured it for no one.
Oh, I see.
In this view, Christ did not shed his blood to just create a general fund of grace that depends entirely on human free will to activate. Rather, his blood was shed intentionally and effectually for his people.
It was targeted, like the doorposts.
Exactly. He actually paid the full penalty and perfectly secured the absolute salvation of all those given to him. The application, like the blood on the doorposts, is specific, and therefore the salvation is certain.
Okay, here's the detail that gives me chills every time I hear it. The hyssop.
Ah,
We talked earlier about how rough and common this weed was in Egypt, and how it was used to violently splatter the blood. It seems like such an obscure, minor detail. But the sources point out where hyssop shows up in the New Testament accounts of Jesus' execution.
it is one of those breathtaking narrative details in the Gospel of John.
Lay it out for us.
In John chapter 19, as Jesus is hanging on the cross, enduring the wrath of God, and completing the ultimate substitutionary sacrifice, he says, "I thirst."
Yeah.
And the text specifically records that the Roman soldiers filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stalk of hyssop, and lifted it to his mouth.
Oh.
The theologians we are referencing argue that this is a deliberate redemptive historical marker provided by John. It signals to the reader that the true and final Passover sacrifice is being completed at that very second.
So it's not a coincidence.
Not at all. The exact same instrument used to apply the blood of the shadow in ancient Egypt is present at the shedding of the blood of the substance on Calvary.
I mean, you literally cannot make that up. And then there is the visual of the door itself. Jesus famously calls himself the door in the Gospel of John, saying, "If anyone enters by me, he will be saved."
The door. Yes.
And our sources point out the physical geometry of what happened in Egypt. Think about the visual of applying the blood to the doorframe. You strike the lintel above, then you strike the doorpost on the left, then you strike the doorpost on the right, and the basin of blood is down at the threshold.
If you connect those points.
If you connect those 4 points of blood, it naturally forms a cruciform pattern, a cross.
The imagery is incredibly potent. The argument is that those who dwelled inside the blood-marked house in Egypt were completely safe from divine wrath because justice had already been satisfied at the doorway by the blood of the substitute.
Right.
Likewise, the New Testament claims that those who are united to Jesus Christ by faith are eternally safe from the judgment to come. As Paul writes in Romans, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
That's powerful.
The Old Testament narrative asks a fundamental, burning question. Where is the sacrifice sufficient to deal finally with human guilt? The ancient Hebrews knew the blood of bulls and goats could never truly take away sins. They only provided a temporary, repetitive covering.
And the New Testament answers that exact question with a resounding, it's not another sheep, it's not endless animal sacrifices, it's the Son of God, the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ.
The final answer.
So if we take these sources seriously, if we accept this ancient blueprint and its ultimate fulfillment, what does it mean for you listening right now? How do the theologians and writers we're studying apply the lessons of a blood-stained doorway in 1446 BC to our daily lives in the modern world?
The sources make a very sharp critique of modern human nature here. They argue that the fallen human heart instinctually knows it needs a covering. It instinctually seeks refuge from guilt and the fear of judgment.
We all want to feel safe.
Exactly. But the argument goes we always seek it in the wrong places. The world is desperate for a shelter, but it attempts to construct its own doorways.
What does that look like?
We try to paint our achievements, our self-worth, and our ideologies on the doorposts of our lives to ward off the existential dread of not being enough.
I want to dig into that because it's not like people today are literally sacrificing rams to a moon or painting blood on their apartments in the suburbs. Our idolatries look much more sophisticated, but our sources argue they serve the exact same function. What are some of those modern doorways?
The authors we are consulting outline several modern false refuges. The most common, they suggest, is moralistic self-improvement. The belief that if my good deeds simply outweigh my bad deeds, the universe, or God, will be forced to accept me.
Right, karma, basically.
Yeah, it's building a doorway out of your own resume. Then there is religious heritage or external performance, relying on the fact that you are baptized, or that you attend church, or that your grandparents were devout.
Just going through the motions.
Exactly. Many today seek refuge in therapeutic self-definition, the idea that my internal feelings and personal authenticity are the highest truth, which somehow exempts me from any external moral judgment.
Living my truth.
Yes. The sources also point to people seeking shelter in political identities, social justice ideologies, or even progressive theology that attempts to systematically erase the very concept of God's holy wrath entirely.
I really want to pause on that last point because it is a massive cultural issue today. A lot of people listening might hear this story and think, a God of wrath, a destroyer in the night, killing the firstborn, that feels very primitive.
It's a very common modern objection.
Yeah, people think of God as a loving, cosmic grandfather who accepts everyone exactly as they are and would never judge anyone. How do the sources we are looking at address that sentimental view of God?
The theological texts we are analyzing argue that the Passover narrative shatters that sentimental view completely. Their argument is that a God without justice cannot actually be a good God.
Wait, explain that.
If God does not judge evil, oppression, and sin with absolute terrifying severity, then he is not holy and he is not safe. The book of Exodus leaves absolutely no room for a harmless deity.
So justice is required for goodness.
Exactly. The sources point out a crucial paradox. The exact same God who mercifully provides the Passover lamb is the God who righteously strikes the land of Egypt.
It's both mercy and wrath.
Yes. In this theological framework, the gospel is good news precisely because there is real, terrifying condemnation from which we desperately need saving. The argument is that if there is no wrath, the cross is just a meaningless tragedy.
Just a guy dying for no reason.
Right. If there is no judgment, the blood on the doorframe is just ancient vandalism. But because God is holy, sin must be punished. And the Christian claim is that Christ bears that punishment for his people.
If you take these sources seriously, it forces a massive paradigm shift. It essentially says to the reader, your ultimate safety in this life and the next does not depend on how strong your faith feels on any given day.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't depend on your moral track record. It depends entirely on the object of your faith. Think about the Israelites in those houses again. Some of them might have been trembling in absolute terror under the kitchen table, weeping, barely holding it together.
Completely panicking.
Right. Others might have been sitting calmly, eating the roasted lamb with complete stoic confidence. But their emotional state didn't save them.
Not at all.
God didn't say, when I see how perfectly you obey or how brave you feel, I will pass over. He said, when I see the blood, I will pass over. The argument here is that your refuge is Christ's finished work, not your own emotional sincerity.
I think that brings up a crucial theological distinction that our sources labor to clarify. While the blood is the only thing that saves, we must distinguish between saving faith and bare intellectual assent.
Okay, so it's not just agreeing in your head again.
Right. The Israelites had to actually apply the blood and remain inside the house. The theological tradition we were exploring affirms justification by faith alone, but as the writers frequently point out, the faith that justifies is never alone.
It produces action.
It is a living faith that produces obedience. True faith receives God's warning, believes God's promise, and rests exclusively in the refuge God has provided. It abandons all self-righteousness.
You stop building your own doors.
Exactly. It doesn't try to build a better, prettier door frame. It simply stands behind the one God has already marked with blood.
And part of resting in that refuge, according to the text, is the command to remain inside. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. The authors argue this is a call to a persevering dependence upon Christ.
You don't just visit the shelter, you stay in it.
Yeah. You don't start your spiritual journey by relying on the grace of the cross and then suddenly decide to finish it by relying on your own self-reliance or by wandering out into worldly philosophies. You stay in the house. You stay under the blood.
Because it's the only safe place.
Because outside of that specific shelter, there is no safe spiritual territory. The world will constantly offer you alternate shelters, financial success, the approval of crowds, new spiritual ideologies. But the claim of these sources is that none of those can withstand the judgment of a holy God.
The sources also raise an important practical point regarding the family unit. The Passover was instituted fundamentally as a household ordinance.
It was a family event.
Yes. The elders taught the fathers applied the blood, and the entire family was gathered within. The authors point out that this presses upon the reader the profound duty of teaching the realities of redemption to the next generation.
It's not something you outsource.
Exactly. We're not meant to outsource the story of rescue to occasional programming. The enduring summons of Exodus 12 is to explain the reality of sin, the holiness of judgment, the necessity of a substitute, and the beauty of grace within the everyday life of the home.
It becomes the lens for everything.
It is making the story of redemption the interpretive center of how a family views the world.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and recap the incredible journey we've been on today through these ancient texts.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started in the oppressive, suffocating darkness of ancient Egypt, in the midst of a cosmic war between the creator of the universe and the false gods of an ancient superpower. We examined the scandalous, deliberate, violent slaughter of a substitute, the spotless lamb.
The mashak and the shachat.
Right. We looked at the messy, absolutely necessary application of that blood to the wooden doorframes, using a rough bunch of common weeds. We tried to feel the terror and the peace of obediently waiting behind that boundary of blood while unstoppable judgment passed over.
Such a powerful image.
And finally, we followed that crimson thread all the way to the cross of Calvary, to Jesus Christ, who the New Testament declares is the true and final Lamb of God, whose perfect sacrifice provides the only safe shelter from the wrath to come.
It is a narrative that, if accepted, fundamentally alters how a person views their standing before God. The question the sources leave us with is no longer whether we can construct a convincing moral doorway to present to the world.
That's off the table.
Yes. The question is whether we will humble ourselves to receive the refuge God has exclusively provided. The challenge is whether we will abandon our self-made shelters and rest entirely in the finished work of the substitute.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought as we close out today's deep dive. It's a paradigm shift that really arrested me when I first read it. Think about this. On that terrifying night in Egypt, the firstborn sons of Israel were spared their lives because a lamb died in their place.
The substitute took the blow.
A substitute took the literal blow. But centuries later, when the ultimate fulfillment of this story arrived, God didn't spare his own firstborn. He allowed the true firstborn, the only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, to experience the absolute midnight of divine judgment on the cross. He absorbed the wrath so that the destroyer would pass over your house forever. What does it mean for your life today to stop frantically trying to build your own temporary shelter and simply rest beneath his? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.